ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Archer Report. I'm your host, Steel Archer, and we have Chairman Gennady Stolyarov II of the USTP, the United States Transhumanist Party, and I really want to thank the chairman for taking his time out here on my Saturday, I guess your Friday night or something like that, Chairman, taking your time out to help us and guide us through some USTP news update and also what's happening with you. So let's get into it. We got lots to cover here on the Archer Report. So firstly, let's just do a health update. How are you?
Well, I have been quite busy in recent weeks. Indeed, I believe the greatest scarcity for me is time. And if I were to have more time to achieve what I've set out to achieve, I think that would be most welcome. But we are in a time of rapidly evolving developments. The U.S. Transhumanist Party is quite active. We have a lot of events that recently transpired and a lot of events planned as well. So one of the events that I'm looking forward to will occur this Sunday, U.S. Pacific time at 5 p.m. That's 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. And in Australia, that's going to be 10 a.m. on the next day, so on Monday. And that will be our virtual enlightenment salon with Dr. David Hanson, who is the creator of Sophia and, of course, the head of Hanson Robotics. So Sophia has made the rounds. Indeed, she is famous worldwide. She is the first robot citizen of any country, as far as we're aware. She's a citizen of Saudi Arabia. So it will be very interesting to speak to Dr. David Hanson.
Yeah, absolutely. Hanson Robotics. We have talked about Hanson Robotics here on the show and on Detonation, and also we've had people who've actually visited Sophia and talked to Sophia. And Sophia is a very interesting, sophisticated learning robot. She is very, very interesting. So I am very excited for the USTP. That is right in the wheelhouse of what the USTP should be doing, and that is a very exciting news. So tune into the USTP Virtual Enlightenment Salon in order to watch that, in order to learn from that, maybe submit questions or whatever you want to do. I think this is really, really, really exciting, and it's interesting that she's a citizen of Saudi Arabia. That's interesting. The big giants in the robotics field, obviously the United States is there, Japan is there, Saudi Arabia swinging in because of Sophia, and the European Union lags behind in robotics a bit. Some talk about Egypt as well, and obviously Israel. I'm not sure about Egypt. I've heard Dr. Catherine Diamandas, Dr. Catherine coming on here, and she talks about Egypt a lot. She lives in Cyprus, so she has association with Egypt, so I don't know on the ground, and I've never heard that, but she talks about that a lot. But Israel as well, having sophisticated robotic systems as well. So this is really fantastic. Hanson Robotics, really famous, and Sophia, really famous, really famous. So very, very, very interested. And if you can, try and nibble down on the consciousness questions. When will she? How does she think? The process of thinking. These are really important. How does she actually come to conclusions? Because she is a bit of a guru. When you talk to her, she comes up with some pretty amazing analyses of the questions that she's asked, and she's asked a lot of questions. So I'm really excited for that, and it's right in the wheelhouse of what the USTP is there for. So congratulations, Chairman. It's very exciting news, and we look forward to hearing more and seeing and watching that unfold.
Yes, indeed. I actually had the occasion to see Sophia the robot in person at the 2018 RadFest in San Diego. And this was a presentation to a large audience by Ben Goertzel, who accompanied Sophia. And as a result, it wasn't really possible to interact with her individually. But after that happened, I had the opportunity to interview Ray Kurzweil on stage. And I asked Ray Kurzweil what he thought about Sophia. And he was quite impressed, given that this was a live demonstration and there were no attempts to, let's say, prescript anything that Sophia had said. So, for instance, Sophia does get a lot of her information from the internet, and there was a bit of a lag in the internet connection at the time. And that lag was reflected in Sophia's responses, but the responses that she did give were quite cogent.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations again on the interview with one of the creators of Sophia the robot and Hanson Robotics. This is very exciting. Do you want to remind people what the USTP is? Why robotics would be interesting for the United States Transhumanist Party, and why people should get interested in joining you on the Virtual Enlightenment Salon, etc.
Yes, indeed. So the United States Transhumanist Party stands for putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. We believe that many of the contemporary and historical issues facing humankind can be solved through the rational application of science and technology. And robotics and automation are crucial components of that. Robotics will enable tasks to be done that previously required a lot of human manual labor to perform. And the widespread application of robotics will improve human well-being, it will improve human prosperity, and it will improve human safety, because not only would people not be required to do those arduous manual jobs, but they could also be spared from environments which are at a high risk of transmitting contagious disease. My ideal for the future of humanity is one in which every person has the ability to pursue the kinds of creative work that human minds are uniquely capable of, and anything else would be automated. So any provision of basic human needs would be automated. But robots also can exhibit an element of interactivity, and initially it would be along the lines of narrow AI, and certainly I would consider Sophia to be an example of narrow artificial intelligence rather than artificial general intelligence. But there are aspects of creativity that are also possible with that, because of the vast amounts of information that even narrow AI systems have access to, and the ways in which they are able to recombine that information. They would be able to generate combinations that human beings might not have thought of before. And hence it's possible for even narrow AI entities like Sophia to generate interesting insights. And some AI systems, of course, have composed music, they have created works of art, they have entertained people with dialogue that at least is interesting. Some of them have even passed certain definitions of Turing tests, though sometimes that has been done through essentially rhetorical trickery. Some of these chatbots, for example, will kind of throw back your own question at you, or they would just draw on a vast database of information, and if you mention certain keywords, they will mention something relevant in a way that looks like they're carrying on the conversation. So there are still many steps that need to be taken before we have true artificial general intelligence and before we have true sentient AI. However, in the meantime, I think these systems can do a lot of good, provided, of course, that they are deployed rationally and responsibly. And one of the goals of the US Transhumanist Party is to consider a lot of the ethical issues surrounding the deployment of automation and AI to make sure that the impact to humans is always as beneficial as it can possibly be. So we want AI and robots to liberate us. We do not want AI to be used as a tool to essentially rigidify existing societal stratifications or impose burdens on humans. So this is why I am concerned sometimes about the use of certain predictive algorithms in ways that individuals don't have control over. And any deployment of AI systems needs to respect the rights of individuals, including the right to privacy, the right to sovereignty over one's data, the right to determine how one's information will be used. And likewise, it's important to consider the possibility of artificial intelligence in a few decades leading to some sort of sentient beings that may be distinct from humans, or they may, in a sense, be integrated with humans. And it is important to consider a framework of rights that would apply without regard for a particular type of biological origin. This has been an important focus for the US Transhumanist Party with regard to the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, version 3.0, which one can find on our website at transhumanist-party.org, and which was adopted in the course of extensive voting by our members who have thought carefully about how a future society would need to conceive of the notion of rights and what sorts of rights can be universalized irrespective of the substrate of sentience. So this is most definitely an area that we are watching carefully and that we will continue to be at the forefront of the discourse in the coming decades, so that by the time these issues become of immediate importance, we will have the frameworks ready to ensure that societies have peaceful ways of absorbing this technology and preventing any clashes that might arise.
Wow, that's really important. And what I've always said is that now is the time to really start thinking about these ethical issues, get them down on paper. Robots are already integrating into the economic field. You know, people are losing their jobs to robots, and they complain about it on one hand, they like it on the other. There's already automation of the labor force is racing ahead with or without the consent of humans, with and without the consent of the labor force itself. That's in low labor, that's in unskilled labor, and it's merging to higher skilled labor. Higher skilled labor is slowly getting automated. And the real big problem with society, Chairman, is that they haven't considered the ethical implications of what this means. Do you really want to, use technology as a slave? No. Do you want to use it for the betterment of humanity? Yes. Do you want to race towards an AGI without considering ethical implications and what this means? And somebody really good to talk to about the frontiers of this is Dr. Dan Elton. He knows a lot about the frontiers of where this is in the coding aspect, the language aspect, and stuff like that. These are important questions, and if we don't consider them, we could be heading potentially for a rupture in society, whether that be a Luddite revolution in some respects, or the AI, a Sophia type robot or a Google type brain, iRobot type style, where they want to be liberated from the human enslavers. And this is the problem when society doesn't talk about these issues. You just race ahead without considering the implications. People lose their jobs. They complain about it. They don't look for UBI. They don't look to ride and talk about these issues in the mainstream. And this is where you end up in a big conundrum, while you head straight for the ethical cliff. So this is why we've always supported the USTP, because the USTP has always said, this is the big issue of the 21st century. It was the big issue of the last century. It was the big issue as soon as the computer was invented. It's been the only issue since then, and it needs to be considered, and it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be talked about in the mainstream, not just sold like they do on the mainstream media. Not just sold as robots that can clean your floor and do your vacuuming, clean your pool, or that do automation labor by building cars, in other parts of the world. This is not good and healthy conversation. This is just racing ahead with what we can do without consideration. And what actually has to happen is we need to have principles like the USTP advocates and conversations like the USTP advocates for in the mainstream society, on political stages. And I don't see these conversations appearing. We had a brief moment with Andrew Yang. We had a brief moment of some sort of semblance of the conversation bubbling up, and then it was suppressed. We have moments of these sorts of debate bubbling up in the private sector. Everybody knows Elon Musk. It's pretty hard not to go around the world and people not know Elon Musk. And he's said things like AI is summoning the demon. And whether or not you believe that or not, it's a good way to get the conversation going. And that's kind of what he's achieved through that mechanism. Now, does he believe that 100%? I actually think he does. He errs on the side of that debate, and that's actually really interesting. You can believe it or you don't have to, but by saying that in the position that he's in, he's putting the debate on the table. But you haven't seen that transfer over into political debate yet. Andrew Yang started it. Andrew Yang moving towards there, as you said, Saudi Arabia buying Sophia the robot, making her a human. Obviously, they're having these debates in other countries. Japan, collapsing demography, changing their constituents, the two robots. They are having this debate in Japan. There is a void of this debate in the Western world outside of big tech and science fiction authors, which are even waning now. And the other problem, I mean, is so that it's frustrating that for some reason the United States and the broader Western world are not having these debates, and that is not filtering down to the rest of society. But the private sector, through Elon Musk and characters like this, some of the YouTube debates with algorithms, or Facebook with some of their debates on algorithms, are pushing these debates forward a little bit. But again, they're not bleeding into the mainstream debate about technology, its ethics, its implications, its integrations, and if the way we are racing ahead, the way we are currently integrating into society, if this is what people really want, and that's sad, because We're missing out on a big golden opportunity in order to get it right, in order to get this right. I was actually watching a movie, very interesting movie about. Uh, it'll spoil the movie. Anything I say will spoil the movie. It's a TV series or something, but it was about cyborgs who were essentially, so they you didn't know they were cyborg, but they looked human, they acted human, and they had families and everything. And so for the first half of the movie, it might have been a movie. For the first half of the movie, you thought you were watching people going about their day, and you had this funny thing in your mind that you had this funny notion in the back of your mind that these people are kind of strange. Everyone's kind of perfect. They don't seem to behave quite like normal people, but you give them a pass. They did. They had hierarchy and they did things. They had a commander. He ran the factory, and this guy cleaned the floors, and this person did this. So it kind of felt like a normal human society. And then about halfway through the movie, I can't remember what the movie's called, but about halfway through the movie, there was an alien invasion. People with, alien. So you said, oh, okay, so these aliens are coming to destroy humans. And that's really terrifying. And the city is now on fire and everything like that. And then a little bit down the track of the movie, you learn that the people that you've been watching are actually cyborgs. And what had happened, as they start to flash back, what had happened is the cyborgs had got more and more sophisticated and integrated themselves deeper and deeper into human society, where they became unrecognizable from people. And in the flashbacks, as more information was revealed, these cyborgs are walking around. They're doing the labor. They're cleaning the bins. They're fixing the lights. They're doing the electrical component stuff. And in the background, you can hear the humans, which are indistinguishable from the cyborgs. Obviously, just differentiated by their organic matter as opposed to being an electrical unit. You can hear the humans complaining about the rise of the cyborgs and how they're slowly starting to take over the jobs. And the cyborgs are kind of not cognizant of this. And the two main characters, which is a family, the cyborgs start having human relationship type interactions with each other. So a husband and a wife. But it's two cyborgs falling in love organically through a machine mechanism, as opposed to through an organic mechanism. And the protests are getting louder, and then there's people in the crowd, and they say, "You will not replace us," being the robots. The robots will not replace us. But as the time goes on, the humans eventually lose the planet, and they all have to evacuate to Mars as the cyborgs kick them off. And the reason that the aliens invade halfway through the movie is because the people come back to reclaim Earth. They've built up their Martian outposts, and they've done all that on Mars, and they've come back to kill the cyborgs and take over the thing. But the point is this is a great example of a civilization that doesn't have a plan, just integration for integration's sake, with no real USTP type conversations going on. So if you want to see a civilization like that, where eventually you're displaced because the politicians were too lazy to have the conversation, then that's the right way to go about it. But if you actually want to have a different outcome, an outcome that's great for humans and it's great for robots and eventual sentient robots, you need to have these conversations like the USTP is trying to have.
I would say also it's quite important to have these conversations as a preventative measure against techno-Luddism and against this kind of bioconservative reaction. So if these conversations are not engaged in, then at some point in the future, there could arise a faction of people that will want to actively reject these technologies. But the problem with rejecting these technologies is that we are stuck then with the status quo. And with the status quo, with human beings having the distribution of traits that they do, this is a recipe for societal disruption, upheaval, and decline, and perhaps even collapse, unless technology can be brought in to avert that. I often echo the words of Dr. Jose Cordero, who says that he is not afraid of artificial intelligence, but he is afraid of human stupidity. And whenever human stupidity is brought into the mix, some dire consequences may result. And right now, we are living through a period of time when, unfortunately, human stupidity seems to be ascendant. I have said this to you before. The stresses of the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated economic disruptions and lockdowns have pushed many people to the brink of what could be considered reasonable or sane behavior. And we're seeing a lot more people lashing out against other people, against the society they live in, against the world, than we would have seen in good times. And so foremost question on my mind has been, what can be done to avert that? And I think robots have a role, and artificial intelligence has a role by bringing in opportunities that could check these tendencies of human stupidity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll keep going on that point straight after this break. We'll be right back. Let's talk about Charlie Cam straight after this break.
Life. We have goals that depend on bodies and brains. We work and learn better. We love better when our bodies and our brains function better. At Thrivous, our goal is to help you improve your brain and body, to help you achieve your goals. So that's the power we encapsulate. Ready for help with your goals? Visit Thrivous.com.
All right, Chairman. So we're back after the Thrivous advert. Let's talk about Charlie Cam. Who is Charlie Cam? What's Charlie Cam up to?
So Charlie Cam is the 2020 U.S. presidential nominee of the United States Transhumanist Party, and he has been running since June 12th. He has done a bit of good outreach recently. He was featured in the Daily Express, which is a newspaper in the UK. James Bickerton, the author of that article, he wrote a bit of a provocative piece, but what was interesting is for what is essentially a tabloid publication, that piece was 100% factually accurate. It was just structured in such a way that it would pass as a tabloid article. Like there's this picture of Charlie Cam alongside a robot, and the robot seems astonished at Charlie Cam for whatever reason. But this article, in terms of the content, is completely correct. And this is quite distinct from what we observe in the mainstream media. In the mainstream media these days, there are all of these partisan agendas, all of these selective portrayals and misrepresentations of the facts. But in a tabloid, one can occasionally find a gem like this article in the Daily Express, which is actually giving people genuinely good information. And in addition to that, James Bickerton conducted 2 interviews, one with Charlie Cam and another with myself on the present and future of transhumanist politics. So those who are interested in those interviews can go to his channel, which is called Future Snaps, and find them. So this is one aspect of Charlie Cam's campaign. Another, of course, has been his participation in our virtual enlightenment salons. These are weekly events. They're held every Sunday, and he has been one of the key figures involved in the conversations with every one of our guests. He has been articulating the message of the technological singularity. He's very much a friend and adherent of the ideas of Ray Kurzweil. And furthermore, he is a dedicated life extensionist. He has a vast amount of knowledge about transhumanism. He has a history within the movement that goes back for about 2 decades at the very least. And of course, his interest in these ideas predated even that. But in 2007, he put on the famous Transvision 2007 conference, which brought together Ray Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey, and a lot of the luminaries that we will recognize in the transhumanist movement today, along with celebrities such as William Shatner. So that conference was a moment in which transhumanist ideas rose into public prominence to a significantly greater extent than before. So Charlie Cam has been in our movement for quite some time. And I think it's also important to recognize those individuals who have shown this kind of dedication to transhumanism. So Charlie Cam, in a sense, is their representative. He is one of the torchbearers of our ideas, ensuring that the ideas will remain as techno-optimistic and as focused on the goals of fundamentally improving the human condition as transhumanism was always meant to be. Transhumanism is fundamentally a philosophy that seeks to uplift human beings. And over time, because of the difficulties that humankind has faced, some people have lost sight of that purpose. But Charlie Cam's candidacy will hopefully be a unifying influence on the movement, telling people to look beyond the left and the right, to look beyond the pettiness of contemporary politics, and instead to look upward toward a brighter future for all of humankind.
Yeah, I know Charlie Cam fairly well, and he really holds close to the 3 core ideals of the USTP. Life extension definitely being one of, in Charlie Cam's case personally, life extension is his number 1 priority. And he talks about life extension in many forms, including the chain that he keeps around his neck, which is his cryonics endeavor. So that's very exciting in that respect for transhumanism and for Charlie Cam being life extension. But he holds to the other 2 ideals as well. That's the Transhumanist Party supports cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values. Charlie Cam very close to those ideals I have never seen him really go astray from that. Ideal 3, the Transhumanist Party supports the efforts to use science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks for the human species. And this as well, very close to that agenda as well. Considering that life extension is at the forefront, there's a lot involved in there, but this is very good. So yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for Charlie Camp. I'm glad that he got into this Daily Mail or whatever the publication tabloid was called. This article, and he got those interviews. It's good to see. I always enjoy seeing Zoltan Istvan in these type of arenas, getting interviews and doing media, and he has worked extremely is not a very good word. He's mad in a way. He's extremely dedicated to pushing forward in this frontier, running for president, getting in many fantastic writing. New York Times, I think, even, right? Zoltan Istvan is really proficient with pushing forward these ideas into the mainstream in every way possible. But I am also glad that the USTP can get somebody who can also bleed into this area as well. This is exciting, and we want to see more articles and more journalists and more people and more authors, look and say, what are you guys up to? Let's delve into this arena. Let's ask these people questions. It doesn't matter what you think of them, if you like them or you hate them. Go and check them out. Go and make fun. Go and learn. Go and do whatever you need to do in order to keep the conversation going and to explore the avenues and find out what the USTP is saying. Find out what Charlie Cam is saying. Find out why Charlie Cam is really important in this endeavor. It's fantastic, yeah. And for people who are sick of the mainstream, who are sick of the Republicans or the Democrats or the Greens or this one or the one, the Libertarians or whatever parties, come and check out something that's new, it's different, it's interesting, it's left field, and it's something that it'll get you really thinking about the conversations that the parties are slowly starting to have, but need to have more and more and more and more, and where the world is being pushed towards. And again, Andrew Yang is this wave of consciousness that the Democrats, at least marginally, understand is happening. The Democrats have shown their maturity in a certain sense by allowing Andrew Yang to come forward with these arguments, come forward with these debates, and say, this is what's happening underneath society. Here it is. And by allowing him onto the stage, and he hung on for as long as he did, but not even that, even if he was only allowed on for one debate, they showed that they understand that this is an issue, that this is a talking point, that this is somewhere where society is going. And you're going to see more and more Andrew Yang types, not less and less. So, so Charlie Cam, you really have to go there, listen, learn, ask questions, find out, why is life extension really important? What are these people talking about? So this is really cool. This is really important, and I'm very happy for the USTP and for Charlie Cam, and of course, the other stuff. His history is good, and William Shatner. Everybody knows William Shatner, and so it's fantastic. So it's really exciting. So that's really cool.
Yes, we look forward to more public appearances by Charlie Cam as this election season intensifies, and hopefully he will be able to spread the message of transhumanism in its pure form to new demographics. He's quite adept with celebrity contacts and with the media, and he has some promising ideas for the future direction of his campaign. So I'm looking forward to him rising in prominence in the coming months. I think the most important role that the US Transhumanist Party presidential candidate can have is to be a spokesperson for these ideas, for life extension, for a rational approach to applying technology to solve human problems and mitigate existential risks, because there is such a scarcity of rational discourse in the current political environment. It seems that the elites of both the Democratic and the Republican parties are intent on dividing the country, on setting one half of the population against the other half, instead of finding common ground, instead of finding ways that we can all move forward in a positive sum manner to improve the living standards of everyone. So the transhumanist message seeks to transcend this kind of acrimony. And the way our candidate conducts himself, the way he expresses these ideas, the effectiveness of that candidate in drawing people in from various political persuasions are all crucial, because that is the kind of activity that will form the backbone of our movement and enable people to recognize that our movement offers a path forward and upward, whereas these conventional political paradigms will keep us stuck in the mud.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. The United States seems to be in a tumultuous period right now. We could go on and on about that, some of the reasons behind it. But you know, it seems to be in a transitory phase. And these transitory phases always come to the United States, and it's not the worst transitory phase that we've seen. The Civil War was a big transitory phase, and that was something horrific. So, no, this is definitely not the worst transitory phase. And the thing about the United States is people living in the United States, I've always observed from their writings all the time, the whole history, because it's a country that because of its values, they always think that they're living in the worst time of its history. It doesn't matter when. It doesn't really matter when in the history they are. They never seem to be content with that this is a time of peace and prosperity and that everything's going okay. In America, it's always been quite consistently the worst of times. If they're making a lot of money, it's the worst of times because they're making too much money. If they're having a war or having a civil war or having economic problems, it's the worst of times because they're doing that, or they're having, it's always the worst of times. So, you know, a lot of the rhetoric about it's the worst of the times, it's always the worst of times in America for whatever period of history you're living in. So that's interesting, and we could talk more about that. But you know, there's ways to repair some of the division that's happening in the United States. There's a lot of techniques and a lot of energy gone into dividing the United States, and so it would take a lot of techniques and a lot of energy into reuniting the United States. But all the time that we play these games, again, like we were talking about at the start, the technology will still push forward and be integrated into society without the debate. And the thing is, if the general population doesn't rise up and take its right to debate, especially in a country where the debate is allowed, in the United States, you are allowed to debate these issues and you are allowed to democratize these issues. It's literally your right and almost your duty to do so constitutionally, to debate and to democratize these issues. If the American populace doesn't take that initiative, then big tech and the government and external actors will decide your fate for you, and you will forfeit your ability to negotiate and navigate your technological transition in this period. And then once the period is over, once the door is shut, and the thing about accelerating returns is that the door, the time, the window before the door shuts, it gets closer and faster all the time at a seemingly exponential rate. Your ability as the American populace to decide on your own future in this regard is becoming less and less and less. And this is why the USTP is so important. This is why these debates are so important. And this is why I think there are forces in the United States or in the government or in big tech or in Google that try to deny the population these debates. And when you look at some of the debates that are happening, whether in the United States or elsewhere, of course, debates about income inequality, some other debates are important. Yes, these, sexual orientation and gender and sex and these other things are somewhat important. They're not the defining conversations of the 20th and 21st century. These are very much side issues and problems that are being promulgated and compounded by the lack of talk of technological sophistication. And so by being distracted by these other debates, you are compounding, the American population is compounding its own problems, it's compounding its own issues, and it's giving its power away to entities like the government, entities like big tech, and when I say the government, we can talk about its deep programs, DARPA or something like that, and we could go on and on about that. But that word in itself gets people the hairs on lets the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. But by not engaging in the debate, DARPA will get more power. By not engaging in the debate, Alphabet will Google will get more power. Facebook and Twitter, these big tech companies. So the United States can run around all at once and try and avoid these debates and try and avoid these questions, but you're playing into the hands of the entities and the people and the autocrats and the oligarchs and the systems that want you to talk about anything but. And see, that's where I have a big issue and a big problem, because I actually think these types of issues, you've seen this in the free speech debate. What is free speech? Who should decide? Who should have the power over free speech? Stuff like this. If you give it away to Facebook and Twitter, and if you give your free speech away, you're not gonna wrestle it back. That's void forever. If you give this debate away to these platforms, to these government entities, they will eventually decide how you live your life, and you will no longer be able to debate because it will just happen to you. And you can watch some Black Mirror episodes if you're a dystopian, technological dystopian, in the negative, and you can see how these technologies can be used against you. And a good example of how these technologies could be used against you would be China right now. They're ripping Silicon Valley. I just talked with the general, and they're taking Silicon Valley and they're turning Silicon Valley's tools, which are some good stuff, communication technologies, social media, fast e-commerce, some really interesting stuff, better health technologies, and they're taking those tools and they're using them directly in an authoritarian way in order to control the population down to what you can buy, what you can eat, where you can go, who you talk to, who you associate with, how much money you can use, and all this sort of stuff. And America, if you don't have the debate, you're going to go down the same rabbit hole. And it's not because there's some sinister plot against you in a way. It's because of the American population either is tricked into or refuses to have these debates, because it didn't democratize the debates when the door was wide open to democratize the debates. And that's the big problem. And it's America that we have to worry about, because America is sufficiently isolated enough up there on the North American continent with Mexico and Canada in order to really be behind a sort of an iron curtain, a digital iron curtain of safety and security, just like in the against the former USSR or other dictators and autocrats around the world, dictatorships and autocracies around the world. America was a beacon of hope and freedom and liberty and all those good things against the rest of the world. And it can do that. It can be an island to itself. But if the American population doesn't have these debates, it will undermine its own castle, and then it can't spread actually good values and out to the other places in the world. And you will end up with pockets of liberty and freedom and pockets of technological prowess in the positive, but they will be so small and far and spread between out of necessity, because people will need these positive technological innovations to actually survive and sustain themselves, whereas America does not. America does not need these to sustain themselves and to feed itself and to do all those other things. That will be a very sad world if we don't have and engage in these debates today.
So there are many issues that you have raised. Let me attempt to address several of them. First of all, the idea of wedge issues being used to divide the population and focus them on matters that are essentially of very little relevance to them personally, but can be used as tribal identifiers to signal that one belongs either to the red tribe or the blue tribe. And I agree, those are quite destructive. Those wedge issues are specifically constructed by each of the sides involved in the controversy to be interminable, because the way that they would get resolved in the near future would involve a series of political transformations that are essentially unattainable today. And the only way to truly overcome those wedge issues is through technology. The USTP has articulated, for instance, the only way to truly bypass the abortion debate is through ectogenesis, through artificial wombs that will reconcile the legitimate claims of both sides of the debate. Likewise, the way to overcome the gun control debate is through technologies of personal safety, which will reconcile people's right to bear arms and people's right not to get shot by others who are bearing arms. So these technological advancements fundamentally shift the parameters of the debate. And this is the essential point that I would like to convey here. Technology shapes the discourse by reconfiguring the incentives to which people are subject, as well as the possible solutions. And there are some technological frameworks that offer better solutions than others. For instance, I am of the view that the internet of the 1990s and early 2000s was actually a better place to have these debates than the social media dominated internet of today, because that internet did not have gatekeepers, it did not have walled gardens. It allowed for more individual agency because largely the way information was spread was through a set of decentralized blogs or websites. Each individual could have their own page, even via a free and cumbersome service like GeoCities, but it was well within the technical abilities of individuals. And at the same time, organizations would have their own websites. So if one wished to learn the views of a particular organization or a particular group of people, one could visit one of those websites. But there weren't these algorithms suggesting where people go or reinforcing people's prior notions, so to speak. And furthermore, there weren't these platforms that, through their configuration of policies, could very significantly shape the discourse. So I would like to go back to more of a decentralized internet, to one where the individual is sovereign rather than the individual playing within the rules set up by a lot of these platforms. But it's a difficult task because some of the advances in the meantime have had certain benefits. For instance, social media have enabled people to maintain closer contact with others in their lives, former friends who might have moved to a different location or moved on to a different stage in their lives, as well as build other connections. So social media platforms have also facilitated the emergence of informal networks and collaborations that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And it's important to preserve those good aspects. But likewise, I would say I prefer the Facebook of 2013 to the Facebook of 2020. And I think sometimes the kinds of complaints that people level against these social media entities also have partisan political motives. And as the social media companies react to them, produce unintended consequences. For instance, in the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which was a very unfortunate event, Facebook reacted by clamping down on the expression of certain ideas. And it didn't have to do that, but I think the Facebook executives felt like they had to throw a bone to their critics. But of course, the way they responded is not going to prevent a future Cambridge Analytica type of situation, but it has resulted in significant limitations on the freedoms of independent media outlets. So a reporter, a genuine reporter like Ford Fisher of News to Share, who goes to sites of, let's say, noteworthy public events. He will often attend protests or hearings and film them and actually give people an idea of what's happening on the ground. But he doesn't go through the filters of the mainstream media. He has had a lot of difficulty with the social networks. They have sometimes actively blocked his content, even though he's not taking a partisan stance. He's not editorializing. He's just trying to convey the reality of what is happening. And it seems that the social media giants, because they're so centralized, are vulnerable to pressure from very polarized and vehement activist groups that each want to push a particular agenda and want to use the social media platforms as vehicles to do so. Therefore, I believe that a decentralized communication technology, like the early internet was, is much more robust at preventing this kind of distortion because there are fewer pressure points. If everyone has a blog and each blog is hosted by an internet service provider who, let's say for the sake of argument, is legally prohibited from policing the content. They're just obligated to provide access to those who pay. Then you have freedom of speech. You have a kind of hyper-pluralism in terms of the voices that are able to express themselves. And it's very difficult for someone to get, quote, canceled, because yes, somebody could be outraged by what somebody else writes, and they have the right not to go to that person's website. They have the right to ignore whatever that person puts out there. But it's very difficult to have a Twitter mob or a mob on any kind of social media platform if you don't have that kind of centralization. And I know the social media platforms, they have policies against abuse, they have policies against hateful activity, they have policies against bullying and harassment and intimidation. But the problem is those policies are extremely difficult to enforce. And trolling, doxing, ganging up on people have been unfortunately quite common phenomena. So I believe there needs to be a way to decentralize the internet again. And there needs to be some way, without limiting people's freedoms today, to open up the discourse and create more robustness so that we're not all dependent on the whims of a particular platform. That's not to say that I want the government to shut down Facebook or Twitter. That would again be quite counterproductive. I think it would lead to worse indirect consequences and direct consequences than the problem that it's meant to solve. But we need to ask, how can technology decentralize online interactions again, but also create this kind of commons that used to exist? Because with the centralized platforms, oddly enough, there has been fragmentation of the discourse as well. Because each platform is its own walled garden, and they don't like to give people an easy way to move across platforms. If you post something, you have to repost it in every other platform. And then the reception in each platform could vary considerably as well. So for instance, I've had content that did really well on Facebook, but not particularly well on Twitter, or vice versa. And YouTube, even though YouTube has greatly improved in the abundance and variety and quality of content, seems to now be an environment where it's very difficult for original content created by lay people to get a large number of views, compared to the early 2010s, for instance, where it was not uncommon for a video of someone just talking about a subject to get views in the 4 digits at least, whereas now it's difficult to get views in the 3 digits for such a format. And I think it's because the platforms have changed their algorithms. But if we return to a situation where really the decisions of individuals about how to engage with content creators become more dominant than the decisions of the gatekeeper platforms, then there will be an improvement in the discourse. Unfortunately, with the current platforms, there's a kind of reinforcement effect of tribalism, polarization, with the filter bubbles that people tend to enmesh themselves in, and the algorithms suggesting to them more content like it or more extreme content. It's difficult for individual judgment to overcome that, because each person can get a selective representation of reality. The value of having a common sphere of discourse is that one does get exposed to different perspectives, and one gets a more realistic assessment of what other people think. Now, one consequence of this, which I think is going to be very interesting to watch, is that I think we have absolutely no idea, for instance, who is going to prevail in the 2020 US presidential elections. So right now, the polls The official polls keep saying Joe Biden has a double-digit lead on Donald Trump. But keep in mind, the official polls were wildly off base with their predictions regarding the contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And that's not to say that Joe Biden is going to lose. I can't make that sort of prediction either. But one phenomenon that has happened is that there has been a polarization in the perception of certain institutions that used to have a kind of common recognition. So people who are more likely to support Donald Trump are also more likely not to trust the polls or to participate in them. And as a result, I think Donald Trump's numbers may be underreported. Again, I don't mean to say necessarily that Donald Trump will win either. I have no way of foreseeing that. Or maybe there has been some sort of widespread disillusionment among his former base. But with the current media environment, we no longer have as clear of a perspective into public opinion as we used to because of this hyperfragmentation. It could very well be that large portions of the population are thinking something and we have no idea what it is. We have no idea how to reach them because they completely reject the methods of communication that we have adopted. And we may reject the methods of communication that they have adopted, whoever we are and whoever they are.
You brought up a lot of interesting points here, and I want to touch firstly on political polarization. You know, these algorithms feeding into your own logic set. And if your logic set isn't really, if it's biased to begin with, you end up more biased by the end of that. And that's very bad for discourse. The other thing I want to say, compounding onto that thought, is that, you know, Donald Trump complained about fake news in 2015, 2016, and he's continued to complain about fake news during his presidency. And I actually think this is actually a good and vital topic to bring up. Now, he wasn't bringing it up in the context of social media. He was talking about more traditional forms of media, CNN, etc. But, you know, I'm very happy for this because it raised a consciousness and an awareness that all information isn't true, and that people, especially the mainstream media, who are now writing articles that are always disputed, and that's what it should be in journalism. All the facts should be there. It should always be disputed. It should always be double checked, especially for big media who have the money and the government backing and the sources and the time to publish something correctly. You know, I think this is a great debate that he brought up, and that he really changed the sort of mainstream media landscape, and he brought back inquisitiveness, regardless of whether it was for his own purposes or not, or whatever. This is not the point. The point is that the media had to pull their socks up for the first time in a long time and actually do their job. And I think this was really good. But a disturbing thing is with the social media, these gatekeepers, as you call it. I mean, people's attention spans have collapsed. People don't migrate out to websites. So you were talking about the blogs in the early days of the internet. Rational Argumentator, for example, would be one of those. But the thing is about your website and your blog and the Rational Argumentator, it takes a lot of energy, effort, and time and skill to publish something on there, and it can be read thoroughly and accepted or rejected by these other people. What's happening now, and it's disturbing. It's very, very disturbing. You scroll through your newsfeed on Facebook or on Twitter, and you see a headline or you see a meme, and the headline or meme could be completely false from a random website. But people say, 90% of unemployment in the United States. I just saw it on my Twitter thing. But they never clicked on the link. They never saw the website. They never checked the sources. They just read a headline And now they're spouting this idea that there's 90% unemployment. You know what I mean? It was a nuclear war in Tokyo yesterday. Didn't you see it? It was on the news. It was on the news. No, they saw a meme. They saw a meme. You know what I mean? And I've seen a few memes going around nowadays that have a random person there, and they say, "Did you see that this person did this?" And they say, "No, they didn't. This is just a meme. Don't get your news from the memes." And Elon Musk has actually talked about this a lot. You know, this idea of weaponizing memes, because memes are very poignant points of propaganda. And it's disturbing that we've got to this point in our history as humans where Joe Biden or Donald Trump, we don't know until the meme comes out about an hour before the election, and the meme will race around and everyone will say, "Oh, I just saw the meme. I'm voting for this one or that one because I just saw the meme then." It doesn't matter about the revelations of Edward Snowden or what happened 2 years ago or what happened yesterday. It's almost this Orwellian ever-present world where we're living in the ever-present. It's the headlines that matter. There's no sort of the people will comment and they will complain about the journalist, but they won't read the content. They won't read the context of the content, and they will get their ever-present news from a meme, a weaponized meme. And the power of weaponized memes is growing, and it's getting disturbingly big. And Elon Musk is talking about this, and this is also happening in the crypto space. People are, Elon Musk is tweeting a lot about Dogecoin, which is literally a meme coin. It's a meme coin, but he's playing with this idea that that weaponized memes are taking over, that they're becoming the ever-present Orwellian idea, and the fact that everybody, and I like it, everybody has an opinion on Facebook and you can chatter away and banter, but because of algorithms confirming your bias, if you do something that it picks up on, then you feel like you're right in your stance. No, you're not right. It's always 50-50 on a stance. Everything has there's two sides to every story. Math is the only real right or wrong. 2 + 2 is 4. That's something that's correct. It's debatable in other dimensional spaces or something like that. That's a debate you might be able to have if you're in another dimension or another life or some other paradox or parallax or something. But on the ground, if we're talking about politics or any of the other subjects, there's always two sides to every story, and I find it very disturbing that the headline and memes are becoming so poignant and so persuasive in our society, and that people take this news seriously. And they're taking news seriously of people that don't exist, that never existed, things that didn't happen. And suddenly you see this in comments and people said, I saw it in a meme. No, it didn't happen. It's made up. It's a fake. It's a phony. But this is the state of social media now. And it's partly because of this preferential system that you're talking about, where everyone's getting blocked for actually having an opinion. So the only thing that can float around is non-opinion. So it's just weaponized non-opinion. At least in the early days of the internet, the rational argumentator or these types of ideas, if someone didn't like your website or whatever, they just wouldn't come back. Or they would write a comment saying you're wrong, and you actually had to structure some sort of argument, some sort of thesis in order to compel people. Now, because there is no structure, there is no thesis, there's these limits, Orwellian type limits on your speech. It's very hard to have any sort of a rational discourse and where everyone's just yelling past each other. It makes the world kind of toxic, kind of awkward, and not very uplifting. And it's not very surprising that almost so many after the rise of social media, we have so many more domestic issues in all of our countries. Now, some of these domestic issues in our countries have been very, very good. Protest movements for the right reasons. I'm thinking protests, on climate change. I'm thinking protests on the lack of science and innovation in advocation for more public money towards hospitals, schools, healthcare, these things. Some of these movements have cropped up, but there are usually in the wrong direction. A lot more visceral debates about weaponized meme logic, and that's not what I like. And so that is disturbing. And as with the government always takes advantage of these types of events, and they will try and swoop in with a quote unquote solution, which is never the right thing. That's what they're doing in China. They're swooping in with a solution, and the solution is to essentially spy on you and lock you out of the internet and shut down rational discourse. And that's not where we want to go either. So there has to be some sort of middle ground or shift in the conversation and in the internet. A lot of information now is consumed through video, and a lot of the news or the news information is just people responding to events. So something happens out there in the world, and they say, "Oh, look at this person, look at that person," and different personalities are the point of news contact, and they're always biased. They always have an agenda. They always have an opinion. They're always pushing you towards some end goal that has to facilitate their worldview by the end of it. So you end up voting for somebody or participating in a rally or doing something that they think is important, either for personal gain or political gain or for economic gain or some sort of, and that is the news now. That's who people look up to. It's hard to find, and of course they always say for engagement at the end, they say in the end of the videos, leave your comment, but nobody reads it. It's there as a point of stimulus, not to have a rational debate, but to get people fired up, to get people arguing, to get people towing the line. And it's very hard after watching a 1 hour or a 15-minute or a 10-minute video on someone arguing or pointing out a piece of stimulus and saying what they think about just this chunk of stimulus here. It's very, if you read the comments, they all pretty much tend towards the bias of the person, and there's not much debate, and the people upvote the bias of that person. So therefore the first 2 or 3 comments are the bias, and you have to really dig deep down in order to find another point of view or another analysis, or it's buried or it's hidden or it's been blocked or deleted. So it's just this confirmation circle. So everybody thinks they're right in what they're saying about a piece of stimulus, and there's not really any discourse and discussion going on. And this is the media now. This is the news. This is the way that we consume content. And some of it's good and some of it's bad, and there's a lot of it out there in the world. But most of it is just somebody telling people what to believe for a political end. If you don't like it, you can leave, and I'm going to use all these people to attack you in other forums. And that's what it is. And we've seen this over and over again. They call on their troll armies or their Twitter armies or their Facebook armies, and they say, let's attack this person because we don't agree. And if we don't agree, that means that we're right. No, you may or may not be right. There's always two sides to every story, and this is the harsh reality that we have to live in now. And then as they all delve in and attack, they all get the algorithmic chant. They get confirmation bias, and it goes around and around like that. And that's how you end up with these polarizing debates and people attacking each other in the street. Because when they finish attacking each other in the street, they go home and they see more justification that what they've been doing is correct. Not that it's bad, but it's because the algorithms are now swayed in a certain direction. The herd is all moving a certain direction, completely different to the other herd that's all moving in the opposite direction, and they can't even see past each other's points, which is very good if you're in a leadership position. That's divide and conquer strategy right there. But this is a technological divide and conquer, and because the internet isn't set up where you have to do a rational argumentator, where you actually have to write what you think and what you know and come up with reasoned arguments. Instead, you've got this your champion, ideological champion in that framework, just reconfirming and reinforcing through a piece of stimulus of what you're doing is correct. Then you end up with these problems of polarization.
Yes, indeed. And I myself have lamented the reliance on headlines and memes without further exploration. It seems that a lot of media outlets these days even rely on that. They'll construct a headline that's intentionally misleading. And if you read the article, it avoids being technically false. But the headline is there to create a certain impression. And the authors of such pieces may know that many people will not read past the headline or maybe the first paragraph or two. With memes, I would say it's even worse, because sometimes these memes are intentionally crass, they're intentionally insulting and abusive to large segments of the population. They're presented in this intentionally bad manner. If you look at some of the memes that come out of certain online communities with the large blocky white text with the intentionally grotesque drawings, but somehow they've become templates for expressing certain kinds of notions or interactions. And then there is developed a certain, let's say, insider meme language around them, which actually turns over very rapidly. Every few months, something that used to be a popular meme that spread like wildfire is now considered passé. But you have to be in that circle of meme originators and spreaders to be aware that it's passé in time. And it's quite unfortunate because these memes cease being anchored to timeless ideas and questions of universal relevance. Instead, it becomes an increasingly arcane language for an in-group to essentially differentiate itself and demonize perceived outgroups. And I think this kind of tribal reinforcement is very dangerous for the broader society, because again, it takes people out of this common sphere of discourse. It prevents people from even having a common basis of communication with others. And instead, you have these increasingly remote subcultures that have irrational perceptions of one another. There are so many people out there who genuinely think, because they've been convinced by the likes of Alex Jones, that transhumanists are some kind of lizard people, New World Order, Illuminati, who are trying to mandate the implantation of tracking technology in everyone. And they're completely miss the actual goals for which transhumanists advocate. They completely fail to understand the role of life extension in the movement. They completely fail to understand morphological freedom. They completely fail to understand the decentralized advancement of technology, which is what transhumanists advocate for. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions of other strains of thought that lead people to react in extreme and sometimes violent ways toward them. And also, it's quite easy for people with unstable personalities, with dispositions that might function decently well in calm, stable times, but which are closer to the edge of sanity than many others might be. It's easy for these people to find others who will destabilize them and push them over that edge into sheer madness and lashing out. So there are these dangerous tendencies. And the question is, how can they be remedied? Now, one aspect of the rational argumentator, which has been quite beneficial for that purpose, is that there is a framework, and the mere participation in that framework serves as a kind of barrier to entry that excludes the unhinged elements. So if you want to participate in that kind of discourse, you have to take the time to write an article. You have to take the time to read the articles that other people have written. If you want to post a comment, it has to be an in-depth kind of response. Or if you want to post something simple, you're free to do that, but it has to be civil. So you have to take the time to sit at your keyboard and think about how you craft your sentences. Think about how to put your best self forward. I think one of the problems with contemporary social media is that there is this culture of a kind of reflexive response where people are receiving these emotional rewards if they reply to something quickly, off the cuff, without really thinking about what the implications of that would be, or if they did the best they possibly could to convey their ideas in a nuanced and respectful way. And I think structural redesigns would be important to facilitate some sort of shift away from that. So I wonder if it might be beneficial with any given post to have comments on it embargoed for some period of time. This is just a thought. So let's say someone puts out a social media post and everyone can read it, but in order to post a comment, you could submit it into a queue, and then say 6 hours later or 12 hours later, it gets published. And in the meantime, you have the option to revisit that comment and edit it. And that would be a kind of social network that allows people to reflect on whatever their initial thought would have been. And if they have a better way of expressing it later on, they have the chance to do that. I found one of the unfortunate facets of social media algorithms is that they tend to elevate content that has a lot of engagement, so a lot of comments, a lot of reactions, but that could be very divisive content. So sometimes if one posts something that elicits very polarizing responses one way or the other, it's going to have a lot of comments and a lot of people arguing with one another. But there could be another post that is more valuable to the discussion and is quite profound, but 95% of the people reading it will agree with it, so they'll just like it. And there will be very little back and forth on it. But that could be the kind of content that more people need to see and would be more unifying in its effects. So these are challenging questions, by the way, because there will always be different online environments and different incentive structures. But the key is, in systems that a lot of people use, how do you prevent the worst from winning out? How do you prevent the crass people, the trolls, the abusers, the unhinged people from actually being validated in a way? And I think there needs to also be a greater emphasis on personal reputation. Online these days, a lot of people think that everyone's opinion is just equally valid. So if you write in all caps and run on sentences using curse words, your opinion is just as valid as that of someone who actually takes the time to write intelligent, articulate thoughts and structure them and respond in good faith to others. And that's not the case. And previously, there was a kind of implicit filtering mechanism because the people whose thoughts were better put together took the time to structure their thoughts and publish them, and the unhinged people just didn't have access to those platforms. But now, the unhinged people can essentially post whatever they please. And my hope is that there will be some sort of cultural reaction against that to make sure that they don't start dominating the discourse.
Yeah, this is some amazing points, and it's very hard because you're also battling against what people want, and for what people want for the most part is they don't want to be intellectually challenged. They want to be they want engagement on material that's energetic, divisive, contentious. They want opinion over fact. They want to hear self-validation in terms of what they're doing, and that all drives engagement towards a particular funnel of thought, regardless of what that thought is. People are always funneled down this and again, it comes back to that reinforcement algorithm. Because then it gets more and more intense, and so that's why people, there's jokes of people talking past each other, and I think, love him or hate him, someone like Jordan Peterson, a lot of the time in his talks and the way he's trying to structure his engagement, he's just trying to explain some facts that he read from his analysis, his 20 years of analysis of work in doing what he did in psychology and other things. And he's saying, here are some facts. And people take that as his opinion, and that's why he received so much vitriol. Now, he tried to differentiate when he had an opinion and when he had facts, but people couldn't really understand the two different. Now I'm saying an opinion, and you can argue with me, and here are some facts. You can't argue because this is just what the literature says. But it's interesting that when he would go up against people, and he would say, here's what the literature says. It says this, this, and this, and this. And they say, you can't say that. You can't say that because. He says, I'm not saying it. This is what it says, and here you go. And I find that's a really disturbing and interesting, but it's disturbing that because he's saying it, it's received as opinion. So it's kind of like 2 + 2 is 4, Chairman Gennady. You can't say that. You're not a mathematician by trade, or something stupid like that. That's
right.
Your opinion, and that's how he was received, and a lot of that someone like Stefan Molyneux, though, that's an opinion. He's got an anarcho-capitalist opinion, and he can lay facts in and around his opinion, which is his body of work, that anarcho-capitalism and individual freedom and all that is what he thinks tied with the non-aggression principle, is what he thinks is best for society, and he lays facts in and around there, but he's open to being attacked all the time because he's laying out an opinion almost constantly, differentiated from someone like Jordan Peterson, who was a lot of the time just laying out literature, and people were receiving it in their heads as an argument because they're talking past each other, because these two worlds are so far from talking past each other. When they receive that new information, it sounds like an argument. It sounds like an attack because it challenges their worldview, and that's what I find really disturbing. So when we talk about all these issues on here, sometimes it's not an argument. Sometimes it's just trying to say people should engage in reading about the facts, reading about the literature, thinking about the issues, think about what they're saying. I'm making an argument for people to do their own engagement. And that's all we're saying, for example. But it's not talking, it's very awkward that these people live in these polarized worlds. They say men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Well, in this case, especially in the United States, some political faction is from Mars and some other political faction is from Venus, and they're missing the point that the sun powers both of them. Both
Right.
of their planets or something, and I find that very disturbing, especially in a context where it's so important and so vital that as a world we have the final conversations before we delve in to the biggest step of our evolution. And I know that a lot of the processes that are ongoing now are the tantrums of a species and a species, that's evolving into something bigger and better than it is. But at the same time, I can also see us getting stuck in this toddler phase, or this teenage phase, or whatever phase we're in before we go to the stars, before we evolve, before we create AI, before we do the cybernetic revolution and all these other things that we're right on the verge of doing. And the biggest disappointment for me has been COVID and the fact that people are arguing over whether or not, right up to the president, or whether or not we should wear masks or not. It's pretty simple. There's a pandemic, you wear a mask. It's pretty obvious from the influenza. It's pretty obvious from history. It's been pretty obvious the whole time. But how this has turned into an actual debate, which impacts human health, I don't know. And that's because, again, people are talking past themselves, and you've got doctors and scientists. And again, going back to your point, that everybody's opinion is valid. So Dr. Fauci would write on Facebook, I think, masks are valuable and important. And then Frank or Lisa or Jim or Joe would write in the next one, no, they're not. And everyone goes, all right, both opinions are equally valid. I'm going to just choose the easier option because this ties in my head with notions of freedom and notions that I think are invaluable. So I'm not going to wear a mask and actually help promulgate a disease around an area. And I think that's been a big disappointment for me in the United States. I understand the arguments and I understand the debates, but countries that have done well on this issue, they have some of these advancements, but they have different ways of approaching their social media, different ways of doing things, and they don't talk past each other when experts say, this is the facts, this isn't an opinion, this is some facts here, but people are receiving it as opinions. And I'm very disappointed by the public and by the government response and by the corporate response, not so much on the pharmaceutical side or anything like that, but I'm very disappointed overall in the behavior of humans during the COVID pandemic and their response. It's been not very good for a species that's trying to go to space, that's trying to, on the verge of doing all the other things that we're trying to do.
Yes, and I'm quite disappointed in the human response to COVID-19 thus far as well, with the exception of the medical personnel, of course, and the developers of vaccines, the developers of other treatments who have made remarkable progress, not just in terms of the speed of advancement, but also in terms of saving lives in the meantime. Because even as COVID infections are spiked,
Jim, are you there?
is that the people who are hospitalized get better treatment. Doctors know better how to take care of them and how to save them if they are in a dire situation. So there's learning on that front, but the societal response has definitely been a disappointment to me. And yes, it does seem like people take positions about COVID-19, not in response to the facts or any sort of consistent narrative even, but in response to a perception of what political side will it serve. So as an example, take the American left's response to various kinds of protests. If the protests were against government-imposed lockdowns, then they were oh so horrible because they were spreading the virus. If the protests were for the Black Lives Matter movement, on the other hand, then all of a sudden, all those arguments went out the window and it became a moral duty to attend those protests. And I'm not here stating that either set of protests was justified or unjustified. I personally would not have participated in either set of protests for a variety of reasons, one of them being I don't want to catch COVID-19. But it's important to be consistent here. So either these protests do contribute in a significant way to spreading the virus, or they do not. Pick one. And then one's attitude toward the protests should derive from some sort of internally coherent view of reality. So let's say one believed in the moral legitimacy of either of those causes, but one also considered the risk of transmission of COVID-19 to be very significant. One could reconcile those positions. One could contrive socially distant protests. One could organize a protest where one tells the participants, okay, you have to stand a certain number of feet apart and we're going to enforce that.
Can I just interrupt you there for 1 second? You know, what you said before about the healthcare workers, they're doing all this work despite of most of the government's reactions. They're doing all this magical work despite a lot of the policies and political infighting and the fighting that's gone on. In most countries, authoritarian and democratic alike. So well done to them. They're doing a really hard job, despite most of the society pushing back against them. But I was just thinking exactly what you were saying there, and I want you to continue on this point. But the media supporting one set of protests and not supporting another on different arguments on health implications because it pushes a political narrative. The one thing they haven't seen in the media is because in the past, Trump's election being one, Obama's being another with the social media, and a lot of going further back, a lot of media praised innovations in political discourse, innovations in protesting, innovations in this. They haven't done that in this case. They haven't praised virtual. They haven't been praising virtual protests or ways to announce a protest without gathering in large groups of people. They've been pushing this narrative. You can't there is no protest unless there are groups of people, if you know what I mean. So if one set of protests goes online and does it in a safe way, it's not acknowledged, because I've seen that. I've seen different groups trying to maneuver and do their protests in a safe, COVID-friendly way. No media attention whatsoever. The media will only focus on the action. It will only focus on the people in the street, and they will only praise or comment on one particular type of protest, which is humans in a group on the ground causing some sort of disruption and making some sort of traditional statement reflective of what we know in the past. And again, I'm with you. I'm not even an American. And we've had these protests here in Australia, and I'm the same. I object to all forms of social contact on health grounds. I don't even barely go outside on health grounds. So this is not the time to be doing that. But the media is not pointing out innovations in protests. They're focusing on the particular type of protest that gets the most clicks and that gets the most debate and goes back to that social media feed. Again, keep talking about this. This is very interesting.
Yes, and this is a tremendous irresponsibility on the part of the media, because they do have this power, for good or for ill, to selectively emphasize or de-emphasize certain events. And what they choose to emphasize follows the maxim of if it bleeds, it leads. So they have an incentive to amplify the most destructive, the most, let's say, sensational in a negative manner behaviors, which then creates an incentive for more of those kinds of behaviors. But the content of a given cause does not necessitate those behaviors. And had the media acted differently, for instance, in response to the murder of George Floyd, if the media had focused its attention on the activists who were lobbying for reforms to policing practices, maybe we would have had more cameras arrayed in town hall meetings. There could be virtual town halls held, which thousands of people could have attended. And if they cared about changing the way police operate, they could offer their views in public comments. They could write letters to their representatives. They could fund other organizations that engage in these kinds of efforts. So I agree, there's absolutely no reason why gathering in a large crowd with a potential to escalate into violence, because large crowds are notoriously difficult to control even by well-intentioned organizers, would be the only way to achieve this kind of change. Societies work along a multiplicity of channels, and people who care about their personal safety will find ways to coordinate activities without having to essentially all congregate in close quarters. So if there had been more thought put into this, then a factually and morally consistent case for or against various kinds of activities could have been articulated. But the sensationalism that so characterizes the media class led them to disregard that possibility. And as a result, a lot of people on the right now think COVID-19 was a hoax, because how is it that all of a sudden the very impactful precautions that were advocated in, say, March and April and early May, all of a sudden were completely disregarded in late May and early June, and now increasingly emphasized once again, even though the fundamental nature of the virus hasn't changed. Our understanding of it might have changed, but it's still understood to be highly contagious and highly dangerous. So the lack of a consistent narrative from established institutions and from the media has fed misconceptions on the other side. Now, I do not believe that COVID-19 is a hoax. I do not believe that the virus was simply concocted for political gain. I think it's a very real and present danger. However, I can understand why a lot of people would be led to believe that it's a hoax because of the hypocrisy of how a lot of institutions have articulated and when they have articulated the need to take precautions. So it's always important to approach this from the standpoint of what is true, what is objectively real, because while people are entitled to their own opinions, they're not entitled to their own facts. And if people want to advocate for a cause, I'm entirely open to hearing them out. And hopefully what they present will be a reasoned set of arguments for why change in certain areas is justified. But reality cannot be discarded in doing so. Just because someone passionately wants some sort of outcome doesn't nullify how diseases transmit themselves. And it certainly undercuts efforts at reasonable precautions for lay people to very clearly spot the inconsistency there. So hopefully some lessons have been learned in this regard. But my concern is that in a time of great strain, both economically and in terms of the social environment, it's difficult for people to take a step back and just reflect and try to figure things out for themselves. Instead, they're stressed and they tend to be driven to one extreme or another. And that's the problem, because I think a lot of people want good outcomes. Nobody wants to catch a highly dangerous virus. I think some people may underestimate how dangerous catching such a virus could be for them. But nobody wants to catch it if they believe that it's truly dangerous. And also, I don't think anyone wants to be shot by police. I don't think anyone really supports innocent people getting harmed by police, or even people who are guilty of some crime receiving a disproportionate punishment, as George Floyd certainly did. So there are a lot of commonalities to be found in the goals, but because of this polarization and because of how the pundits, political consultants, media figures, and office holders of both political parties try to use these flashpoints to their advantage, the conflicts get amplified and the opportunities for working toward some common ground get diminished. I think in other countries, there is a certain advantage because many democracies have parliamentary systems where parties have to form coalitions often in order to govern. There's not this strict two-party polarization. Countries like Australia have an advantage because you have ranked preference voting. So people don't have to just pick one option. They could do what we do internally in the US Transhumanist Party and rank order their entire set of preferences. And that tends to lead to more avenues for discourse, for accommodation, for at least recognizing that there is some merit to what people of a different political persuasion are saying. But it's so difficult in a country like the United States because of this decades-long dynamic of increasing polarization that I spoke about during our prior conversation, because often anything one says could be misconstrued as some sort of tribal identifier or another. And I myself have been called everything from a communist to a fascist, which is kind of strange, but it just shows that reasoned discourse has the tendency to really upset the hardcore partisans. So generally speaking, the people who are very much entrenched in the narrative of the red tribe or the blue tribe will be instantly offended by what I have to say. But the people who tend to be more nuanced or more moderate or want to transcend the entire distinctions of left versus right, they tend to be more open because they see that there are other options. And indeed, there are millions of other potential options that one could conceive of. But one has to keep one's mind open to possibilities other than those suggested by the established institutions of the day.
And in America, you want to talk about these debates. There is a groundswell of this, and this is proved by Christina Tubin, who organized a multi-party debate. Again, provably, objectively, not broadcast, not facilitated, not shown to the mainstream media. A huge collection of political parties, organizations, different lines of thought, gibbering and jabbering and talking and debating and saying, we have a point of view, we have a point of view, look at what we see, this is what we see, across a huge spectrum, all completely blacked out by the media. And you can see that America does want to have these debates, but it's not allowed to because of, again, either the social media gatekeepers or the mainstream media gatekeepers, or the corporate lobbyists, such as the red team and the blue team, who contrive to push people either into two sets of thinking, two funnels, where a conference like you participated in wouldn't even be conceived democratic in some forums. It's anti-democratic because you're supporting the people who, if you support them, you're supporting the other team of the people who you don't like. In other words, if you're supporting these people and their thought and giving them oxygen, then you're supporting either Trump or Hillary, or you're supporting a Democrat or a Republican. And that's the sort of thinking, debilitating thinking, that is really killing democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. And I do agree with you that the preference system, the rank preference system, like we have here in Australia, it lets go of all that, because you have to number it 1 to 6 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 or whatever, however many are on the ballot, which means that you have to have a rudimentary understanding of your electorate and of the political parties, of their stances, what they've said on TV, and what they would do with the power and position that you entrust them with. And this is very important. I don't want to keep you forever, Chairman, so can you tell us anything else you want to tell us in terms of the news? Remind people about the virtual summit coming up with Hanson Robotics. Anything else you want to say? I don't want to keep you here forever. It's been already 2 hours, and I know it's probably getting late there, so...
Yes, well, thank you, Steele, for quite an engaging conversation. And I will make several points on the thread of the discussion that has transpired most recently, and then I'll offer some concluding remarks as well. But the Free and Equal Elections Foundation debate in Chicago on March 4th was an event that I'm very much proud of, precisely because it featured this diversity of thought and allowed genuine, honest, and civil engagement among 18 candidates from at least 8 different political parties, depending on how one looks at it, with genuine differences of ideas about the best courses forward in American politics. And yet, they were able to refrain from ad hominems. They were able to refrain from shouting one another down. They had a few lively exchanges, but always in the realm of discourse on ideas. And that is crucial. That is what can save the situation in America if people all over the political spectrum, whether they have conventional views or unconventional views, realize that they need to keep the discussion in the realm of ideas and not venture to just attack people because they ostensibly belong to a different tribe. And some of the people who came out of those debates, of course, went on to further prominence. Joe Jorgensen, who participated as one of the Libertarian Party candidates at the time, is now the Libertarian presidential nominee. And I would say she was also one of the most articulate participants in that debate. And just a week and a half after that, on March 15th, I had the opportunity to moderate a debate, also among candidates of a variety of persuasions, but one of them was Spike Cohen, who is currently the vice presidential Libertarian nominee. And Spike Cohen turned out, of course, he used a lot of humor and irony to convey his views, but he turned out to be quite a strong supporter of technological progress and the kind of entrepreneurial innovation that we will need to get us out of this predicament. And furthermore, in the conversation after the debate, he essentially admitted to being a proponent of indefinite life extension. So here's another example of a person who definitely participated extensively in these kinds of unconventional conversations and debates, and whom the media really should have been paying more attention to, because now he is the vice presidential Libertarian nominee, and the Libertarians are the third most prominent political party in the United States by all objective measures. And yet, both the in-person debate in Chicago and the virtual debate that you and I set up were essentially ignored by the mainstream media. So that should tell people something. The mainstream media do not paint a complete picture. And ultimately, it's incumbent on individuals to take charge of their media consumption and to actively seek out content that actually tries to get at what is happening objectively, and also to expose themselves to different perspectives, because the social media platforms are not going to do it for you. You have to make that active effort, and you have to be willing to learn. You can't just say, oh, I have a preconceived set of views and what I believe is right and what everyone else believes is wrong. Because generally, people with that mindset, they actually haven't arrived at those views themselves. They've been influenced by some sophisticated set of propaganda measures. And the only way that people can get out of that is if they continually engage in a practice of reflection and searching for the truth, and not being so entrenched in their existing views that they would wish to demonize those who think differently. So I think that was a great conversation to have. It's one that hopefully a lot of viewers of the Archer Report will sympathize with, because you do have an audience of active thinkers. The US Transhumanist Party also seeks to foster this kind of environment of discourse through the virtual enlightenment salons. As I mentioned, they're held every Sunday, and this upcoming salon with David Hansen, the creator of Sophia, is going to be at a slightly later time. So this one is going to be at 5 p.m. US Pacific time on Sunday, and that's 10 a.m. in Australia on Monday. But usually we have them at 1 p.m. US Pacific time. And we encourage people to go to the page on my YouTube channel where these salons are streaming and participate in the chat while they're ongoing, because sometimes we will take questions or acknowledge remarks from the chat, and they will feed into the conversation. And the idea is to replicate the environments of the 18th century Enlightenment salons, where people would get together in polite company in very refined settings, often palaces or mansions or civic buildings with a great deal of fine decor, and they would speak about philosophy, science, economics, politics, art, music, history, all of the disciplines that seek to fathom the world in some way. And they would also seek to draw connections across those disciplines because they are all interrelated and they address a common reality. But the purpose of these gatherings was precisely to delve in a deep and sophisticated way into key questions within those disciplines, and not to communicate in offhand memes and pronouncements, but rather to actually listen and engage in sophisticated argumentation. So hopefully that kind of environment is what the virtual Enlightenment salons will continue to foster. We've had one per week since early May, and the recordings are all available on my YouTube channel, which is G. Stolyarov II. So that's the first letter of my first name, my last name followed by the second. You can look that up, and I hope that anyone who hasn't seen the past Enlightenment salons will do that, and also join us live for the future Enlightenment salons.
Fantastic. Well, I hope people check that out, and I'm really excited for those. They've been fantastic. And the big one I want to thank is to thank very much to Malik out there. It's been big for the space community. In this time of COVID, it's been very hard to do interviews, to get interviews. Everyone's very busy. There's a lot happening in the world, so the show content has slowed. But because of Mars and its proximity to Earth, we have been getting some space shows in, which has been extremely fun, and well done to the UAE for sending the Mars mission off, and China is now going as well, and obviously the United States with its crewed mission. So a call out to people if they want to come on the show, or if they know of people. There is an invite out there, because we are actively looking for people, because a lot of our regulars and a lot of things have happened since COVID, and people just do not have the time, the energy, sometimes the resources to do as much as we want. It's even with partner organizations such as TAFs, and other organizations as well. It's been a very tough time in the world right now for people, but we are actively looking for people, and we want to thank the space people for really engaging, and congratulations with the space people, because they're making a lot of progress in the last few weeks and months, and since Elon Musk's reusable rockets, this is a really big area where humans are advancing, and we're pushing big time. So thank you very much for that. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Chairman. I've been really appreciate that. Visit the Virtual Enlightenment Salon. We want to do more shows. I mean, I'm ready. The COVID thing is really stuffing up, but we will get Charlie Cam on. We want to get Charlie Cam on to talk to him and get his perspective on the USTP, running for president, getting his articles out there, trying to look for reporters, publishers, people who can get the voice out there on the back of the campaign, and get him to conferences, etc., and really especially get the life extension idea out there. This is a very important idea for the USTP. One of the primary, if not the primary, arguments. So this is an exciting, and Charlie Cam is well known for his life extension advocacy. And there are a lot of very good technological facets in the USTP platform planks, policy things. And I'm you know me, I'm a holistic guy. Life extension is important, but I more holistic in the fact that you have to connect the dots and connect the components. If you can't have life extension without smart cities, and you can't have smart cities without space. And for me, it's a very holistic ecosystem of technological advancement. But life extension definitely is the core, and that is its own point of reference. It's its own biological argument. It has its own biological analysis. And so that is very important. And Charlie Cam, with his connections, we have a limited window in order to get this out there while this campaign is hot. So we're also making a call out to reporters, to anyone who knows reporters in any newspaper, anywhere, wherever they are, wherever they might be, even in your local advertiser, even your local mini paper. Everything at this point will help to trickle up to a broader, to a bigger discussion on life extension and life advocacy right now. And although it might seem a little disconnected, people are thinking about human health because of COVID. So this is kind of a very, it's a little bit odd to make that point, but by default, people are thinking about the point of life extension because they want a vaccine so they don't die, but they don't know that a lot of these issues can be overcome if you end aging. So all there is a knowledge gap there that people have to just understand, that there's a knowledge gap. Cure aging, no COVID forever, and no other COVID, like coronavirus symptoms forever. We will be permanently vaccinated from those type of illnesses and a lot of the other illnesses and degenerative effects that come along with aging. So there's just a knowledge gap there, and it's a very important time that we fill that knowledge gap. It's about filling that gap in the knowledge. So I'm really excited. So keep that in mind to the audience that's out there. Well, thank you very much, Chairman. Been a very, very honored to have you on as always, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Steele. It was an excellent conversation today.
Thank you.
Alone. Uncertainty. Doubt. Fear. In a strange place. Something stops you. Challenges test your strength. A rush of adrenaline. The light. The air. It is the moment. You elevated.
Life. We have goals that depend on bodies and brains. We work and learn better. We love better when our bodies and our brains function better. At Thrivous, our goal is to help you improve your brain and body, to help you achieve your goals. So that's the power we encapsulate. Ready for help with your goals? Visit Thrivous.com.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main beam unable. Roger, main beam interval.